They say the gray rot has no smell, but they are wrong. It smells of silence. It smells of things forgotten. I am O.S.Elderbranch, the first memory. I have kept the records of this forest long before the village of Edgehaven grew tall enough to fear it. Today, we begin with a girl named Kaelin. She thinks her gift is a curse. She thinks she is alone. She has no idea that the shadows of her parents are watching from the deep woods, waiting. If you are ready to enter the forest, listen closely. This is Chapter 1, The Scent of Forgetting.
The gray rot had a smell, and it was the scent of forgetting. It lacked the honest, earthy musk of natural decay, carrying instead a dry, sterile odor, like old bones ground to dust. The scent clung to the outskirts of Edgehaven, marking the threshold where the village's orderly fields surrendered to the ancient, brooding sprawl of the Elderbranch. It was a daunting, tangled maze of thorn and vine. Kaelin lived by that scent. To her, it was the smell of a promise breaking. She knelt, feeling the damp soil soak into her worn trousers. The weight of the forest's shadow pressed against her spine like a physical hand, making it hard to breathe. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, but she ignored it. Her focus was narrowed to the devastation before her, the patch of moon petals, now a skeletal ruin. She didn't need to touch the leaves to know they would crumble to ash. The life had been leached from their very structure, leaving behind brittle gray husks where vibrant green should have been. Her mother had called them Starlight Catchers, for the way their silvery blooms opened only to the stars. They were a living memory, and the rot was devouring it. The rot had started a month ago, a subtle leaching of color from the wilder edges of the village. The elders blamed a dry season, then pests, then the will of the gods. Kaelin knew better. This wasn't a sickness of the world. It was a sickness in the world. She could feel it in the soil, a deep, resonant coldness her own innate warmth fought against and lost. It left a sharp, metallic taste in her mouth and a weary ache behind her eyes. It was the price of holding back the gray tide. Her fingers, usually so sure and gentle, trembled as she cleared away the brittle leaves. It felt like tending to a corpse. A knot of frustration and grief tightened in her chest. She was supposed to be good at this. Since her parents had vanished into the deep woods 10 years ago, her garden was the only place she felt whole. They had left her with nothing but a half-remembered lullaby about the Grove Mother's tears and a legacy of whispers she could never quite piece together. It was the only place she was permitted to succeed, so long as her talent looked like simple hard work rather than the witch-filth the neighbors whispered about. Giving up on the shears, she pressed her palm flat against the cool, blighted earth. Her eyes drifted shut. She sealed out the sight of the decay and the condemning line of the village fence just beyond her property. There were no strange words or dark powers. She simply spoke to the life she knew was still there. It was a silent, desperate plea sent from her heart down into the roots. Don't fade, not yet. Remember to grow. Grow. A faint warmth, like a held breath, bloomed against her skin. It was a familiar, secret feeling, a thrum of life that answered her own. She pushed, not with strength, but with an offering, a quiet invitation. The warmth spread, sinking into the soil like summer rain. A deep, resonant hum vibrated up her arm, a connection forged and accepted. She opened her eyes and pulled her hand back. The withered stalk had transformed. Gray receded from the stem, leaving a vibrant green in its wake. At its tip, a single, pearl-white bud appeared. Its waxy petals trembled as they unfurled, drawn out by her touch while the afternoon sun still held the sky. A sweet, clean scent pushed back against the sterile odor of the rot. It was the smell of air after a thunderstorm, carrying the fragrance of wet stones and her mother's hair. For a heartbeat, the garden didn't feel so empty. It was beautiful. It was life. But in Edgehaven, it was a crime. "There, did you see?" The voice was sharp, slicing through her stillness. Kaelin flinched, her heart seizing. At the edge of her garden stood 3 boys, their games of dares forgotten. The speaker was Finn, the blacksmith's son. His shoulders were already broadening from his work at the forge, and he wore a sneer that was a perfect copy of his father's. "She does that all the time," one of his companions whispered. It was Rorik, a lanky boy who shifted uncomfortably under Kaelin's gaze. "My mother says she sours the milk just by walking past the dairy." "She's not just a bad omen," Finn said. His voice was loud and accusatory as he took a bold step forward. His friends followed, flanking him like hounds. "She's a hagkin." The word struck Kaelin harder than a stone. The old slur was a brand for those born with the forest touch, a name for anyone whose blood was rumored to be mingled with the wild magic of the Elderbranch. To the people of Edgehaven, the term meant only one thing: unnatural. The same insult had been whispered behind her parents' backs before they disappeared. "I didn't do anything," Kaelin said, her voice barely a whisper. She instinctively tried to shield the blooming moon petal with her body. "Liar," Finn spat. "We saw you." "You whispered to the flower. You put your witch-filth on the petals." His eyes darted around the garden, landing on the small bundle of king's root she had harvested for Elara. With a sudden lunge, he snatched the herbs from her basket. "My father says your kind is the reason for the rot. You bring the forest's sickness with you." "The forest isn't sick," Kaelin snapped, a spark of defiance flaring through her fear. It's hurting." Finn laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "It's a forest. It doesn't hurt. It grows and it kills. And you're just a piece of it that doesn't belong here." He held up the stolen roots. "Maybe getting rid of these will fix your garden." With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the bundle into a muddy puddle outside the fence. Cold fury washed over Kaelin. A humming power gathered in her palm, dangerous and hot. She could crack the stones beneath his feet. She could make the very roots of the Elderbranch rise up and crush the breath from his lungs. The images were so vivid, so tempting, that the power terrified her more than the boy ever could. She clenched her fists until her nails dug into her palms. "Where are your parents, hagkin?" he taunted. His voice grew louder, playing to the audience of his friends. Did they get lost in the dark? Or did the forest just swallow them up like it does all the other unnatural things? The words struck a nerve, raw and deep. The careful walls Kaelin had built around her heart didn't just crumble, they shattered. But what rushed out wasn't the cold fury she had expected. It was a wave of pure, desolate sorrow. At that exact moment, the scruffy, one-eyed dog shot out from beneath a nearby bramble bush. He didn't bark. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a creature so thin and matted, a low growl vibrating in his chest. His one good eye burned with an intelligence far older than any stray's. He placed himself directly between Kaelin and Finn, his teeth bared. A jagged ridge of fur rose along his spine. The mangy dog, who usually cowered from every shadow in Edgehaven, was now an unyielding guard dog. Finn and his friends stumbled back, their bravado evaporating in the face of the dog's sudden aggression. "Get that beast away from me," Finn stammered, his voice cracking. Shaking, Kaelin knelt and retrieved the muddy roots from the puddle. Rowan relaxed his stance, nudging her hand with his wet nose. Kaelin didn't look at the boys. She simply turned and walked away, with Rowan trotting at her heels. A silent guardian and a faithful companion for the walk back to her lonely cottage. The public conflict was over, but the internal one was only just beginning. A narrow, overgrown path to Elara's cottage felt like the only safe passage in the world. Kaelin walked quickly, her gaze fixed on the dirt, with Rowan following as a silent shadow. She couldn't face her own empty home. Not yet. The silence there would only amplify the ugly words still ringing in her ears. She needed the warmth and the cluttered safety of Elara's home. She pushed open the heavy oak door without knocking, letting the scent of rosemary and wood fire wash over her. It was the smell of safety. Bunches of dried lavender and willow bark hung from the rafters like sleeping bats, their sharp perfume acting as a balm against the bitterness in her throat. Kaelin's gaze swept over the shelves, taking in the welcome chaos of cracked leather books and jars of colored powders. There were the objects Elara treasured: a spiraled fossil, a raven's feather, and a bowl of smooth river stones. Finally, her eyes settled on a single preserved flame leaf. Its faint inner warmth was a quiet promise against the cold world outside. Only then did she look toward the center of the room. Elara was as wrinkled as a dried apple, with eyes as bright and observant as a magpie's. She looked up from the pot she was stirring, her expression shifting as she took in Kaelin's appearance. "Kaelin, child, you look like you've seen a ghost." Kaelin couldn't find her voice. She simply held out her hand, offering the muddy, ruined king's root. It felt like a heavy, muddied weight in her palm, a symbol of her humiliation. Elara's eyes softened, with an understanding that required no words. She took the roots, her touch gentle, and began to rinse them in a basin of water. "Ah, those horrible boys again, and that ugly old word," she said, her voice a knowing rasp. She gestured with her chin toward a low stool by the fire. "I heard the shouting. Finn has his father's lungs and twice his ignorance." Kaelin sank onto the stool, letting the warmth of the hearth push back the chill that had settled deep inside her. They called me Hagkin." "It's a name for those who can hear the forest song, Kaelin," Elara said, her tone matter-of-fact as she patted the roots dry. "A name given by those who are deaf to it. Fear makes people foolish, and there is nothing Edgehaven fears more than the Elderbranch. They said I was the cause of the gray rot," Kaelin murmured, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Elara's movements stilled. She turned from her work, her gaze steady and piercing. "And do you believe them?" "No," Kaelin said, her voice finding a sliver of its earlier defiance. "I think the rot is coming from the forest. It feels wrong, like a wound." "That, child, is the bigger truth," Elara said, her expression turning grim. She hobbled over to a heavy wooden chest in the corner, its dark timber bound with rusted iron straps. As she lifted the lid, the sense of cedar and old parchment filled the room. She reached into the depths and pulled out a small, velvet-wrapped bundle. "Your parents thought so too," she said softly. "It is why they left." Kaelin's head snapped up. Her heart gave a sudden, violent lurch. Elara never spoke of her parents. Their names were a jagged silence that both women lived around, a mystery too painful to touch. "What do you mean?" Kaelin whispered. Elara unwrapped the object and placed it gently in Kaelin's hands. It was a simple leather cord, holding a smooth piece of dark wood, carved into an elegant spiral. It was cool to the touch and strangely heavy. Kaelin's thumb traced the carving. The wood acted as a key, unlocking a jolt of recognition that surged through her. For a breathtaking instant, the memory ceased to be a whisper and became a sudden, vivid reality. She felt the weight of the necklace against her cheek, and the scent of her mother's hair returned, smelling of crushed leaves and summer rain. She felt the rough wool of a tunic and heard a voice, thick with a love she had almost forgotten, whispering into her ear, "My brave little sprout." The vision vanished as quickly as it had arrived, leaving her breathless. "There was a change 10 years ago," Elara said, her voice low, sharing a secret she had kept for a decade. A subtle one, a silence in places that used to sing with life. Your mother called it the hush. Your father felt a tremor in the deep roots. They believed the heart of the forest, the old pact, was failing. Kaelin stared at the necklace, her thumb tracing the carved spiral. It felt like an anchor to a story she didn't yet understand. "What does this have to do with the necklace?" Your mother made this from a fallen branch of an ironbark tree, Elara explained. She said it helped her listen. She called it a conduit for a deeper song. They went in search of the Heart Grove, a place deep in the forest, hoping to mend the pact. They never came back. The words were a flat, painful statement of fact. No, Elara said, her voice laced with an ancient, weary sadness. They did not, but the hush they spoke of has now become this rot. Whatever they went to stop, it's only grown stronger. She placed a comforting hand on Kaelin's shoulder. That power in you, the thing that Finn and his fools call witch-filth, is the same power that flowed through your mother. The villagers fear the forest, but your mother? She was the forest. She could make things bloom with a touch, a gift from the Grove Mother herself. It's not a curse, Kaelin. It's a heritage. The world blurred as tears pooled in Kaelin's eyes. For so long, her strange gift had felt like a brand, a mark of shame that was the source of her isolation. To hear it named as a heritage, a direct connection to the parents she barely remembered, was a profound and shattering relief. It felt as if a room in her heart, long kept in darkness, had finally been thrown open to the light. As she clutched the necklace, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth pulsed from the wood. It mirrored the secret heat that lived in her own palm. "What do I do?" she whispered. The question carried a terrifying new weight. "For now," Elara said, her tone becoming practical again. Her usual gruffness returned like a comfortable old shawl. "You live. You hold your head high. You never let them make you feel shame for the song you carry in your blood." Kaelin left the cottage a short time later. Her mind was reeling. The world felt larger and more dangerous than it had only an hour ago. She walked the path back to her lonely home, the velvet-wrapped necklace a solid weight in her hand. Her shoulders, which usually hunched inward to ward off a blow, felt a little straighter. Her gaze, which usually fixed on the dirt path to avoid meeting eyes, lifted slightly. Confidence was not yet a shield. It was a seed, fragile and tentative, but it had been planted. She was more than just the village outcast. At night, sleep proved a stranger. Kaelin sat at her wooden table, while the light from a single tallow candle cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. In a bowl of clean water, the moon petal glowed with a soft, silvery light. It was a small beacon of defiance. Rowan sat nearby, a scruffy creature whose fur had long ago taken on the parched, earthy color of the village roads. Caked in mud and matted by rain, he looked like a shadow carved from the very soil Kaelin tended. Only his one good eye remained clear, a sharp and watchful amber gaze that never left her face. Rowan was an outcast dog, a broken thing that had found a home with a broken girl. A heritage, not a curse. Elara's words echoed in her mind, a powerful counterchant to a decade of whispered insults. Her parents were not just wanderers lost to the wood. They were protectors. They had a purpose. Her strange connection to the living world was not a random flaw. It was a legacy. Her fingers traced the velvet cloth before she unwrapped the necklace once more. The dark, smooth wood of the carved spiral felt cool and inert in her palm. It was a piece of a story too vast to comprehend. The object felt less like a key and more like a burden. What could she, a girl who couldn't even stand up to Finn, possibly do with such a weight? The sounds of the village drifted through her shuttered window. She heard the distant clang of the smithy closing for the night, and the faint strains of a fiddle from the tavern. Tomorrow was the harvest festival. It was the one day of the year she was forced to be among them all, enduring their stares and their whispers. A fresh wave of anxiety washed over her. It was one thing for Elara to tell her to hold her head high, but another entirely to face the cold eyes of Elder Thane. With this new and heavy knowledge burning in her mind, She wondered how she could possibly pretend to be ordinary. How could she hide a heritage she had only just discovered? She looked from the dark necklace in her hand to the glowing flower on her table. One was a secret she had always kept. The other was a legacy she had only just been given. Tomorrow, she would have to walk a tightrope between them, praying the line didn't snap.
If you intend to follow Kaelin into the wild, do not venture into the bramble-bound unprepared. I have placed a guide at the foundation of this record, a way to find your bardian, and a collector pack for the trials ahead. Claim them now, while the light still holds. In our next meeting, the fire speaks. It is a spark of devastation that will change her story forever. I remain the first memory. Watch the shadows carefully, for they are already watching you.